大妈倒地要不要扶？
Whether to help an elderly woman who has fallen, this question has long been a topic of heated debate in society. The arguments never seem to stop. Some believe that helping is an act of kindness and responsibility, something one should not hesitate to do. Others worry that if they are mistaken for the person who caused the fall, they might end up in serious trouble. Behind this hesitation lies a deeper fear, the fear of peng si, or staged accidents used to extort money. The so-called peng si was originally a scam tactic used by rogues in the old society to blackmail others for compensation. Today, it has evolved in new forms and is frequently seen on the streets and in shopping malls across the country. Some people suddenly collapse in the middle of the road, while others in shopping centers make false accusations out of nowhere. These incidents not only disrupt public order, but also repeatedly test the limits of human conscience and morality.
1. 大妈碰瓷意外丧命。
An old woman dies in a staged accident. In Shenyang, the roads near the high-speed railway station are always crowded with cars during rush hour. That day, a young female driver was inching her car forward slowly in the seemingly endless traffic. Eventually, she turned off the engine and leaned back in her seat to check her phone, having no idea that just a few meters away, an absurd drama was about to unfold. The one who had set her sights on the driver was a woman in her 50s, a notorious scammer in the area known for staging accidents to extort money. She always had her own logic when choosing targets, preferably a female driver, and ideally, someone driving an expensive car. In her mind, such people were softer-hearted and wealthier, easier to manipulate and more likely to pay compensation. So her eyes darted around, and she quickly walked toward the front of the car. Pretending she wanted to cross the road, she suddenly let herself slip and fell right in front of the vehicle with a loud thud. She thought her performance was convincing and believed she had the upper hand. Unfortunately for her, the female driver was looking down at her phone the entire time and didn't notice anything happening in front of the car. A few minutes later, as the traffic began to move again, the driver put her phone away, restarted the engine, and gently pressed the accelerator. The car slowly moved forward, but in doing so, it pulled the fallen woman under the vehicle. In an instant, the surroundings filled with shouts, and pedestrians rushed forward to stop the car. But it was already too late. The entire farce ended tragically with the old woman dying on the spot. After the incident, the police quickly arrived. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary traffic accident, a pedestrian runover, and naturally, the driver would be held responsible. The young woman was panic-stricken, repeatedly explaining that she had no idea anyone was in front of her car. But during the initial report, the police were not entirely convinced. After all, they wondered, how could the driver not have seen someone right in front of her vehicle? The real turning point came when surveillance footage was retrieved. The video clearly showed that the old woman had deliberately walked to the front of the car and then intentionally let herself fall, while the female driver never made any contact with her at all. In other words, the entire incident was a complete self-directed and self-acted scam. The driver was simply an unwilling participant dragged into it. Ironically, the deceased, identified as Lee, was already infamous in the area as a habitual scammer. Many shop owners and drivers had previously been blackmailed by her, and she had long been notorious in the local community. The police investigation also found that her family immediately demanded compensation after the incident, an amount as high as 1 million yuan, trying to turn the tragedy into a money-making opportunity. However, the court was not fooled by this ploy. During the trial, the video evidence and eyewitness testimonies fully reconstructed what had happened. In the end, the judge ruled that the female driver bore no civil or criminal liability whatsoever for Lee's death. In other words, she did not have to pay a single cent, nor would she carry the stigma of being an offender. Once the verdict was announced, public opinion exploded. Many applauded the driver, calling it a victory for the rule of law. Others sighed that Lee, who had spent her life obsessed with extortion, ultimately fell victim to her own trap. Some commentators even remarked that this judgment should be seen as a warning, a powerful and sobering lesson for all those who make a living through deceit and staged accidents. An elderly woman dies while staging an accident. In Shenyang, the roads around the high-speed train station are always jammed at rush hour. That day, a young woman was inching her car forward among the endless line of vehicles. Eventually, she turned off the engine and leaned back to check her phone, unaware that just a few meters ahead, an absurd scene was about to unfold. The person watching her was a woman in her 50s, locally notorious for faking traffic accidents to extort money. She had her own logic for picking targets, preferably female drivers, and preferably those driving nice cars people she thought would be soft-hearted and, more importantly, wealthy enough to pay. Her eyes darted. She strode to the front of the car, pretended to cross the street, then suddenly slipped and fell flat with a loud thud against the bumper. She thought her acting was flawless and that she had already won. Unfortunately for her, the young driver was still looking at her phone, completely unaware of what was happening in front of the car. A few minutes later, as traffic started moving again, the driver put her phone away, restarted the engine, and gently pressed the accelerator. The car crept forward, rolling the woman who had fallen right underneath it. In an instant, there were screams. Pedestrians rushed forward, waving for the car to stop, but it was too late. The ridiculous scam ended in tragedy, with the woman dead on the spot. Police arrived quickly. At first glance, it looked like a routine traffic accident, a pedestrian run over, a driver presumed at fault. The young woman was terrified, insisting she had no idea anyone was there. During the initial questioning, police were skeptical. How could she not have seen a person in front of her car? The turning point came when they reviewed the surveillance footage. The video clearly showed the older woman deliberately stepping in front of the car and letting herself fall, while the driver never touched her at all. It was, in other words, a complete self-directed and self-performed scam. The driver was simply dragged into it. Ironically, the victim, surnamed Li, was already notorious in the city as a habitual scammer. Many shopkeepers and drivers had been extorted by her, and she was infamous among her neighbors. Investigators also found that her family demanded compensation immediately after the incident, a sum of 1 million yuan, trying to turn the accident into a chance for profit. The court, however, was not fooled. Video evidence and eyewitness testimony fully reconstructed the truth. The judge ultimately ruled that the young driver bore no civil or criminal liability for Li's death. She did not owe a single cent and would not carry a criminal record. The verdict sparked public debate. Many applauded the decision as a triumph of law and fairness. Others lamented that Li, who had spent her life immersed in deception, died caught in her own trap. Still others called the ruling a powerful warning, a textbook lesson, and a wake-up call to every would-be scam artist who thinks crime can still pay. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us.
中国游客曾先生一家前往瑞典游玩。
Mr. Zhang, a Chinese tourist, traveled to Sweden with his family. What was supposed to be a joyful international trip unexpectedly turned into a shocking controversy. The family arrived at a hotel in Sweden in the early morning hours. Since there were no available rooms at that time, they requested to rest for a while in the hotel lobby. However, their request was refused by the hotel. Later, the local police intervened, and the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Mr. Zhang's family not only experienced rough treatment from the police, even the two elderly parents were taken away and dropped off far from the hotel. According to Mr. Zhang's own account, they were abandoned in a cemetery more than 30 kilometers away. That claim instantly struck a nerve among countless Chinese citizens. Words like beating the elderly and left in a graveyard hit the public like a bomb, igniting widespread outrage. Chinese netizens were furious, condemning what they saw as brutal and inhumane behavior by the Swedish police. To be honest, when I first saw this news, I also felt deeply upset. A family happily traveling abroad only to be treated this way, anyone would sympathize with them and feel angry. But while most people were lost in emotion and anger, I couldn't help but wonder. In recent years, many Chinese have traveled abroad, and China has even become one of the largest sources of tourists to Sweden. So why was it only this particular family that ended up in such an incident, supposedly being thrown into a cemetery? As the saying goes, everything happens for a reason. And sure enough, the next day, the story took a dramatic turn. If they had arrived early at the hotel, why didn't they simply ask to check in ahead of time? According to the hotel manager's interview, Mr. Zhang's family actually arrived at night, not at dawn, as they had claimed. The hotel, located in downtown Stockholm, was a youth hostel where the official check-in time was 2 p.m. Before that hour, guests were not allowed to check in. If the family truly arrived at dawn, that would have been a full 14 hours before check-in. But if they arrived the night before, didn't they already know their flight schedule? After all, flight delays usually mean arriving late, not early by half a day. Could it be that they had simply booked one night too few? If so, why didn't they offer to pay for an extra night and check in early instead of insisting on resting in the lobby? That part really doesn't make sense. Moreover, police records show that the emergency call was made at 1:43 a.m., meaning that before the call, the hotel had already allowed them to rest in the lobby for several hours. Did the Swedish police really beat the elderly couple? The public outrage in China largely stemmed from the claim that the police had assaulted the old parents. However, as several video clips later emerged, the truth began to surface. Still, the matter required further examination since only partial footage was available. It turned out that Mr. Zheng's family had been loitering in the hotel for a long time and even used the excuse of the father's illness to threaten the hotel clerk. Unable to handle the situation, the hotel finally called the police. The first video, recorded by Mr. Zheng himself, showed two female officers carrying the elderly man outside. Their actions were indeed somewhat rough, but to call it beating or violence seemed exaggerated. Meanwhile, Mr. Zheng could be heard screaming dramatically, "Murder! Everyone come see!" The family, once removed from the hotel, refused to calm down. In the middle of the night, right at the entrance of a hotel in central Stockholm, their hysterics drew a crowd. In the second video, one of the Zhengs sat on the ground howling, "Help! They're killing me!" while Mr. Zheng filmed and shouted, "Come and see! The Swedish police are killing people!" Nearby, a female officer stood with her hands behind her back, looking helpless, and a male officer stood about 2 meters away with arms crossed, his expression mixed with disbelief. The third video, shot from a bystander's perspective, showed that this family's acting skills were surprisingly impressive, especially the son, whose performance even surpassed his parents. When the female officer tried to approach him, he suddenly threw his bag to the ground and flung himself down dramatically, shouting, "Ah, murder! The police are beating me!" His movements were smooth and theatrical, a perfectly executed fake fall. Doesn't this scene seem strangely familiar? After watching the videos, some Chinese netizens sarcastically dubbed the incident the Swedish fake fall. They joked that if football star Neymar saw this dive, he would be moved to tears, and even Cristiano Ronaldo would feel humbled. Eyewitnesses who filmed the scene confirmed that the police did not behave violently. They were simply trying to calm the situation, but the Chinese people suddenly began screaming for no reason. The young man, probably the son, bizarrely threw himself on the ground. It looked like he was faking it. Clearly, the fake accident tactics often seen on Chinese streets did not work so well abroad. Were the elderly couple and their family really thrown into a cemetery? Many Chinese living or studying in Sweden came forward to clarify the misunderstanding. Mr. Zheng had shown a photo of the supposed graveyard, which in Swedish is called Skogskyrkogården. The literal translation is woodland cemetery, but calling it a graveyard is inaccurate. In fact, it is a large park with several chapels and gardens, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The distance from the hotel to this park was only 7.8 kilometers, about an 8-minute drive. When the police found the family causing chaos and crying hysterically outside the hotel, they had no choice but to escort them to this quiet park where benches were available for rest. But in Mr. Zheng's retelling, the story changed completely suddenly. They had been beaten, taken 30 kilometers away, and thrown into a deserted graveyard full of wolves. In reality, there was no 30 kilometers, and certainly no wolves. If anything, the only wolves in this farce were those creating the drama themselves. They believed that the child who cries loudest gets the milk and carried the same entitled attitude they might use with Chinese police crying, shouting, and rolling on the ground into a foreign country. The result? They embarrassed not only themselves but all Chinese tourists. There was even a clear logical flaw in Mr. Zheng's account. He claimed he could see road signs when describing the location. But if he could see signs, that meant they were not in a desolate area at all. In fact, nearby there was a church that sheltered the homeless and a subway station just a few hundred meters away. This whole episode reflected a deep cultural misunderstanding. In Sweden, hotels are not allowed to let people sleep in lobbies before check-in. Since the nearby park had benches and was safe for resting, the police decided to take them there. However, some online commentators exaggerated the story, insisting that the Swedish police had dumped Chinese tourists in a graveyard. Perhaps many Chinese people find cemeteries taboo, but people in other countries do not share the same beliefs, nor can they understand all cultural sensitivities around the world. Arriving before check-in time and asking to stay in the lobby is understandable, but hotels also have the right to refuse. Refusing to leave after being denied, that's being unreasonable. Calling the police and then forcing officers to physically remove you, that's obstinate. Crying, screaming, and rolling on the ground during law enforcement, that's making a scene. Then, exaggerating afterward, calling a park a graveyard to stir national outrage, that's manipulative. In this age, trying to fool everyone with small tricks no longer works. This incident serves as a warning to all travelers. When abroad, follow local rules, respect cultural differences, and don't let individual misbehavior tarnish your country's image. It must be said this season, the combat power of some Chinese uncles and aunties has been astonishing. We've seen people faking accidents for compensation, but rarely people faking assaults by police. We've seen individuals doing it alone, but never entire families working as a team. Your aunties are no longer just aunties, and your uncles, as always, will remain unshakable. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the most outrageous staged accident incidents that have happened.
2. 礼品卡诈骗换来8年牢饭。
Gift card scam earns 8 years in prison. On August 4th, 2024, in the quiet city of Layton, Utah, an ordinary morning made the local news because of a bizarre case. The report came from the manager of a large supermarket, who noticed that the gift cards on the shelves had been tampered with and suspected that someone had secretly replaced them. When the police arrived, they happened to block the suspect in the supermarket parking lot. The suspect was a 60-year-old Chinese national named Lin Ziping. Lin's method of committing the crime wasn't particularly sophisticated, but it carried a hint of Peng Si, a scam that relies on trickery rather than force. He didn't rob or steal directly. Instead, he used a swapping technique. He would take away the unactivated gift cards from the shelves and replace them with cards he had already tampered with. Once an unsuspecting customer paid and activated the card, the balance would immediately be drained. In other words, innocent shoppers were unknowingly paying the bill for him. Ironically, when the police caught him red-handed, Lin still tried to stage a performance to save himself. Facing police questioning, he claimed to understand almost no English and pretended to be confused. When officers asked him to open his bag, he obediently pulled out a thick stack of gift cards with an innocent look on his face. But when asked where those cards came from, he began stammering, shaking his head and waving his hands as if he had no idea what was being said. Seeing that he refused to cooperate, the police decided to take him back to the store to check the surveillance footage. At that moment, a well-meaning passerby stepped in. Seeing the officers surrounding an older, seemingly helpless man, the passerby thought the police were bullying him. He immediately took out his phone to record the scene, questioning whether the officers were using excessive force. Sensing an opportunity, Lin suddenly fell to the ground, pretending to be ill. The passerby, thinking he had caught proof of police abuse, filmed even more eagerly, determined to seek justice for the elderly man. But Lin's performance was inconsistent. One moment he was collapsed on the ground, the next he stood up as if trying to flee, only to fall again dramatically. The officers, frustrated and worried, feared something serious might actually happen, so they called for an ambulance. While waiting, they even kindly shaded him from the sun and tried to calm him down. Yet, the moment the ambulance arrived, Lin immediately perked up, waved his hand, and said he was fine, even attempting to walk away. Unfortunately for him, no matter how convincing his acting was, it couldn't erase the hard evidence. Surveillance footage clearly showed him repeatedly swapping unactivated gift cards while customers were distracted. The supermarket manager also explained the full scam to the police. The criminal group would record card numbers and pins in advance, and as soon as a customer recharged the card at the counter, the balance would be transferred within minutes. Lin's role in the group was that of the runner, the one responsible for physically swapping the cards. During formal questioning at the hospital, Lin initially played the role of a pitiful old man. He claimed he was just running errands for others, had no money, no job, and still needed to send living expenses back to China. He said he was often homeless, surviving on odd jobs. But when the police showed him surveillance footage of him committing the same crime at 2 different supermarkets, his story immediately collapsed. When confronted, he continued pretending not to understand, even making up stories, saying that he had simply found those cards by the roadside. Ultimately, the police charged him with multiple offenses, including telecommunications fraud, attempted money laundering, and document forgery. According to the investigation, in just a few months, he had swapped nearly 100 gift cards with a total value exceeding $30,000. Ironically, the ambulance and medical examination he triggered with his fake illness ended up costing him about $5,000, all of which he had to pay himself because he had no health insurance. The prosecutor's office quickly filed charges, and if convicted, he faces at least 8 years in prison. For a man in his 60s, alone in a foreign country, that almost means spending the rest of his life behind bars. Originally, he had hoped to make quick money with a bit of cunning, but instead, he lost everything a textbook example of trying to be clever and ending up outsmarting himself. After the case was exposed, local media described his behavior as ridiculous, while netizens commented in disbelief. Some said he had ruined his own future. Others compared his actions to the Peng Si scams often seen in China's same trick, different setting, but the same inevitable outcome. The law always wins. From the self-directed falling granny performances in Shenyang to the staged collapses by Chinese immigrants in Utah, the Peng Si scam may cross borders and cultures, but it can never escape the punishment of the law.
一大妈骑电动3轮车，车速过快，漂移摔倒，恰好被路过的民警扶起。
An elderly woman riding an electric tricycle was going too fast, lost control, and fell over. Coincidentally, she was helped up by a passing police officer. Unexpectedly, 2 days later, a man who claimed to be a relative of the elderly woman showed up at the police station, accusing the officer of hitting her with the patrol car. Even with surveillance footage proving otherwise, the man refused to back down and attempted to extort money from the police. On May 27th, in Huainan City, Anhui Province, officers from the Baicheng police station in Fengtai were on duty when they saw a tricycle speeding ahead and tipping over at an intersection. The officers stopped their vehicle, helped the elderly woman up, and asked with concern if she was all right. The woman replied that she was fine, but that was not the end of the story. 2 days later, on May 29th, a man claiming to be the woman's relative stormed into the police station, asserting that she had been hit by a police car and injured. The police immediately reviewed the surveillance footage, which clearly showed that the woman had fallen on her own and that the patrol car had not made any contact with her. Speechless, the man left the station to make a phone call, then returned with a new story claiming that the woman had merely been frightened by the police car and fallen because of the shock. This bizarre explanation left everyone puzzled. Why, they wondered, would anyone be so terrified just from seeing a police car from afar? The officers sternly reprimanded the man and educated him about the consequences of his false claims. Netizens who heard about the incident expressed relief for the officers, saying that without surveillance footage, this could have easily turned into a false accusation case. Others felt that the police had been too lenient with the man after all. He had tried to scam police officers, which was incredibly bold. A similar incident occurred in Tianjin, where a simple act of kindness in the rain turned into an absurd case of extortion. Female police officer Wang Xiaoyun from Tianjin was falsely accused after helping an elderly man who had fallen. On a rainy day at an intersection in Tianjin, an elderly man slipped on the wet road and fell. While passers-by chose to walk around him, Wang Xiaoyun, who was on her way to work, stopped to help. "Grandpa, are you all right?" she asked gently, kneeling down beside him. The old man groaned in pain. It appeared he had injured his leg. Although some bystanders warned her, saying, "These days, you have to be careful when helping the elderly," Wang insisted on helping and took the man to the hospital. At the hospital, Wang Xiaoyun even advanced 3,000 yuan of her own money to cover his medical expenses. She took care of him as if he were her own family, buying medicine and bringing him food. The doctor, touched by her kindness, said, "There aren't many young people as warm-hearted as you these days." But this act of genuine goodwill was soon met with the cruelest betrayal. When the old man's family arrived at the hospital, their expressions of gratitude suddenly turned into fury. The elderly man grabbed Wang Xiaoyun's arm tightly and shouted, "Don't let her go! She's the one who hit me!" Stunned and outraged by his reversal, Wang Xiaoyun couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man's children became furious as well, verbally attacking her. So young yet so dishonest. You knocked our father down and won't even admit it. Shame on you. The old man's son went even further, threatening her, "If you don't pay 10,000 yuan today, you're not leaving." Faced with their unreasonable demands, Wang Xiaoyun stayed calm and said, "Then let's call the police and have them investigate to find out who's really lying." Officers soon arrived at the hospital and retrieved surveillance footage. The truth was revealed: the elderly man had fallen on his own, and Wang Xiaoyun was the only person who had stopped to help. "Speechless now, aren't you?" she said. "Oh, by the way," she added, "I'm also a police officer." The old man's family turned pale instantly. Realizing the gravity of their actions, they hurried to apologize and offered to return the medical expenses. But Wang Xiaoyun refused to let the matter go. Determined to uphold justice, she filed a lawsuit seeking 40,000 yuan in damages for emotional distress. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me.
在社交平台 X 上
On the social media platform X, a video has recently gone viral. In the clip, a woman who claims to be Chinese appears to have tried to cut in line while in Japan. When she failed to do so, she began loudly accusing others of cutting the line instead and got into a heated argument with a young man waiting ahead of her. She shouted hysterically at the scene, even yelling out a phrase that's been circulating in Chinese TV dramas for years, "Ba ge ya lu," a curse word once used to scold people who behave properly and follow rules. Once the video spread online, it exploded into a massive discussion. Netizens from all sides began voicing their opinions. From the footage, we can see the Chinese woman yelling at a man in the queue, saying, "Find out who cut in first. What do you mean I cut the line?" This excuse, "figure out who cut in first," is a classic line used by those who actually cut the line themselves. It's the perfect example of someone who breaks the rules, lacks morals, and still tries to play the victim. Whenever others call them out or try to stop them, they immediately turn it around, accusing others of starting the problem first. And if you dare question them, you might just get cursed out or even hit. Besides reversing right and wrong, the woman also came up with several so-called golden quotes. She shouted, "You dare to hit people for no reason, huh? If you have the guts, go hit someone at the police station." In fact, the blogger who filmed the scene had already clarified everything. It was the Chinese woman who cut in line, and the young man merely pulled her back a bit. As a result, she fell to the ground herself, yet she kept scolding the man non-stop, repeatedly reaching out to shove and strike him, throwing punch after punch at his arm. Throughout the entire video, however, the man being accused never once argued back or raised his hand. In the end, after yelling and hitting without satisfaction, the woman shockingly shouted a Japanese curse word, "ba ka yaro u." This expression is extremely dated. Only older Chinese people still say it, having learned it long ago from old Japanese movies and TV dramas. Modern Japanese people rarely use that phrase anymore. There was also a young Japanese woman standing in line nearby who finally couldn't take it any longer. She tried to gently calm the Chinese woman down, urging her to stop, but it was useless. Unfortunately, the video ended there, so no one knows how the argument eventually concluded. About half a month ago, this video had already reached over 7 million views on Japan's X platform, becoming a widely discussed incident there. Netizens from both China and Japan flooded the comment sections. Japanese commenters mainly focused on whether the woman's actions constituted a criminal offense. Some Japanese netizens argued that this was not a mere quarrel or minor dispute. The woman's verbal abuse and physical pushing already amounted to a serious violent assault, clearly meeting the definition of assault crime. Many called on Japan's police agency and courts to take action. As for the young Japanese man who endured the Chinese woman's humiliation without retaliating, commenters noted that his restraint reflected the modern social value of respecting women, something that's now deeply ingrained in many people. That part, at least, was commendable. Chinese netizens, on the other hand, overwhelmingly criticized the woman's lack of manners and self-discipline, saying she embarrassed all Chinese people abroad. Some even recalled a similar incident years ago when a Chinese man behaved unreasonably in Sweden, and indeed, the resemblance was striking. In both cases, someone tried to take advantage of others, and when confronted, instead of admitting fault, they flipped the story and accused others of being in the wrong.
3. 不是你撞的，为什么要扶？
If you didn't knock them down, then why did you help? That one infamous line from a court ruling would go on to shake an entire nation. If the tragic story of the elderly woman in Shenyang represented the extreme outcome of a staged accident, then the case of the elderly woman in Nanjing falsely accusing her rescuer was another kind of absurd and far-reaching example. The story goes back to the year 2006. Near the Nanjing railway station, an elderly woman named Xu Shulan suddenly fell to the ground in the crowd. A young man named Peng Yu happened to be passing by and kindly helped her up, even escorting her to the hospital. What he did not expect was that a shocking twist awaited him. At the hospital, the elderly woman firmly insisted that it was Peng Yu who had knocked her down and demanded that he pay for her medical expenses. When the case went to court, it caused a nationwide uproar. In 2007, the court's judgment included a sentence that would later become widely quoted across China. According to common sense, if you didn't hit her, why would you take her to the hospital? In the end, the court determined that Peng Yu bore partial responsibility and ordered him to pay over 40,000 yuan in compensation. This verdict spread quickly through the media, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. The first reaction from the people was shock and anger. Many questioned, since when does doing a good deed make one legally liable? If kindness could turn into a burden, who would dare to help an elderly person who has fallen? The national debate over whether one should help or not help began precisely with this case, and for years it dominated public discussion. In fact, if one examined the details of the case, the elderly woman's statements were contradictory and the evidence insufficient. Yet, due to society's natural sympathy for the elderly compounded by traditional values that tend to favor them, the court's judgment was inevitably biased. But instead of upholding fairness, the ruling had the opposite effect. It eroded the public's trust in the justice system and sparked widespread skepticism about whether the law could truly protect good people. The Peng Yu case became a psychological turning point for Chinese society. What should have been a praiseworthy act of kindness suddenly turned into a potential trap, while malicious falsehoods and staged accidents became tools for profit among some individuals. The impact of this single case went far beyond those directly involved. In the years that followed, stories began to surface across the country of elderly people collapsing in public, while bystanders stood frozen, afraid to help. In public spaces, when someone fell, people no longer acted instinctively to lend a hand. Instead, they hesitated, observed from afar, or walked away entirely. The natural spirit of mutual aid that once existed was steadily eroded, and trust between people began to fracture. But deceit can never be a path to survival. It is merely a form of self-destruction. From the tragic scam on the streets of Shenyang to the staged fall in an American supermarket and the absurd court ruling in Nanjing, all three stories convey the same truth. Malice may succeed for a moment, but ultimately it cannot escape the judgment of law and fact. What truly endures, what is truly worth relying on, is not deception or manipulation, but honesty, kindness, and justice. In recent years, the term Chinese auntie has almost become a cultural symbol in itself. Some of these women, whether in China or abroad, have caused one shocking incident after another, leaving people speechless and shaking their heads. And yet, these incidents always spark heated debates online, spreading rapidly across the internet. Just a few days ago, another such episode occurred in Japan, and unsurprisingly, it once again triggered a wave of public discussion.
1月17日，天津街头。
On January 17th, in the streets of Tianjin, a Tesla owner parked his car on the roadside when an elderly woman driving a three-wheeled vehicle suddenly crashed into it. The Tesla owner got out to assess the situation. Seeing that his car had been hit, he asked the woman what had happened and why she had driven into him. To his surprise, the elderly woman insisted she hadn't moved at all, claiming she had her foot on the brake. Not only did she refuse to admit her mistake, but she also tried to turn the situation around, accusing the Tesla owner of hitting her instead. The two began arguing, and the elderly woman started yelling and making a scene right there on the street. The Tesla owner, frustrated, realized that arguing with her would not resolve anything. He decided to check the surveillance footage and called the police. Traffic police quickly arrived at the scene to investigate. The elderly woman immediately began crying and complaining to the officers, trying to explain her version of events. She said, "My tricycle was right here. I didn't move at all. I had my foot on the brake. He reversed and banged into me. Then he got out and started accusing me." When questioned, the woman kept repeating, "I didn't move, I had my foot on the brake." The female Tesla driver, listening to the woman's excuses, calmly handed the surveillance footage to the police. The video clearly showed that the Tesla had been stationary completely still, while it was the elderly woman who failed to hold her brake properly and rolled forward, crashing into the car. The evidence was undeniable. Based on the footage, the police immediately determined responsibility. The Tesla owner demanded compensation for the damage, but the elderly woman, unable to defend herself, suddenly changed tactics. She dropped to her knees, clutched the police officer's leg, and began crying loudly, begging the police not to fine her. Her emotions spiraled out of control as she cried. She began coughing and even gagging. Seeing this, the police tried to calm her down, saying, "Auntie, it's all over. Let's finish the paperwork and wrap this up." But she didn't stop. She remained kneeling on the ground, crying and blowing her nose, completely losing composure. If it hadn't been for the snow on the ground, some of it already melting, she probably would have rolled on the pavement. Her over-the-top display in the middle of a public street left both police officers and bystanders dumbfounded. The Tesla owner was exasperated. He said the elderly woman's attitude was completely different from before. Earlier, she had been arrogant and confrontational, but now she was pretending to be pitiful. He felt that he was the one who had truly been wronged, yet somehow she was acting like the victim. He believed such behavior should not be tolerated and should be handled strictly according to the law to prevent her from scamming others in the future. After the police finished the case on site, the Tesla owner decided to upload the footage online. The video quickly went viral, attracting massive public attention and heated debate. Many netizens criticized the police for being too soft-hearted. They argued that the officers shouldn't have comforted or helped her, saying, "She's obviously acting. In situations like this, as you can't be gentle, you have to be firm and handle it according to the law." Others commented that people like her deserve legal punishment, not sympathy, because tolerance only encourages such shameless behavior. Some suggested that the woman's children should be called to the scene to deal with the aftermath, saying, "Let them watch this video and see how disgraceful she behaved." Other netizens pointed out how lucky it was that there was surveillance footage. Otherwise, the Tesla owner would have had no way to defend himself. Shortly afterward, an official police report was released. However, many netizens were confused by it. The statement only briefly summarized the incident and gave a vague conclusion. Police promptly arrived at the scene. The accident caused no casualties. The case has been resolved, and both parties have no objections. Netizens expressed dissatisfaction, saying that for such a representative traffic incident, the determination of fault and the handling result should be made public. They argued that such an ambiguous report could mislead the public into thinking that the police were incompetent or biased, damaging public trust. Worse, it could give people the impression that behaving like the elderly woman making a dramatic scene might allow one to evade responsibility.
我一直是个好人，品行端正。
"I have always been a good person. I've done nothing wrong. Why are you arresting me?" An elderly woman in her 70s screamed hysterically from her wheelchair on a Tianjin street in 2019. Yet, instead of sympathy, the crowd watching burst into thunderous applause. People clapped and cheered as if justice had finally been served. The seemingly harmless old woman was, in fact, the notorious Grandma Du, a con artist who had tormented the people of Tianjin for 3 years, a woman so despised that her very name made people grit their teeth in anger. In Tianjin, Du's reputation was infamous. She was not only scorned by people, but, as locals joked, even dogs shook their heads when they saw her. Her name had become synonymous with trouble. For years, she caused chaos in countless restaurants, hospitals, and supermarkets. Once Du set her sights on a target, it was like being stuck to tar. There was no escape except by paying her off. Shockingly, she even turned her scams into a family enterprise, forming what people later called a family-run extortion chain. Over the years, Grandma Du had carried out numerous successful scams. In one weekend of 2016, during the dinner rush, she entered a long-established restaurant, browsed the menu slowly, and finally ordered a dish of stir-fried beef with green chili. But as soon as the dish arrived, her face changed. She loudly accused the restaurant of fraud, claiming that the beef was actually duck meat. "You're deceiving customers! This isn't beef at all, it's duck!" she shouted, her voice echoing throughout the restaurant and drawing stares from other diners. She even stood at the door, blocking new customers and shouting that the restaurant was cheating people. The restaurant owner, Mr. Lee, was stunned by the sudden accusation. He patiently explained and even produced purchase invoices to prove the meat was indeed beef. But Du ignored him completely, continuing to make a scene. With no other choice, Mr. Lee called the police. When officers arrived, they tried to mediate, but Du remained defiant, demanding compensation. In the end, to avoid further trouble, Mr. Lee reluctantly paid her 700 yuan in settlement money. Unfortunately, that was only the beginning. The very next day, Du returned, this time bringing along staff from the Market Supervision Bureau. Under pressure from all sides, Mr. Lee had no choice but to pay another 300 yuan. Watching Du walk away triumphantly, he was filled with helpless anger. Emboldened by her success, Du did not stop. In March 2017, she deliberately went to a construction site, pretended to fall, and called the police, claiming she had been injured due to the company's negligence. Even though the site was clearly marked with warning signs, she insisted it was their fault. Police investigations revealed inconsistencies in her story, but she refused to admit it. When persuasion failed, she stormed into a nearby sanitation office, occupying it for hours. There, she screamed, threw objects, and even urinated and defecated on the floor in protest. The sanitation workers, confused and helpless, eventually gave in, paying her 13,000 yuan just to get her to leave. From then on, Du became even more brazen. On the afternoon of December 31st, 2018, Du struck again, this time targeting a large supermarket in Tianjin's Hebei district. She accused the store of selling illegal health supplements and produced a 5-year-old newspaper article as so-called evidence. The shift manager, Xiao Zhang, tried to reason with her, but she refused to listen, demanding 5,000 yuan in compensation. To avoid disturbing customers, Xiao Zhang invited her into the staff office. Once inside, Du threw herself to the floor and refused to get up. The chaos continued until 1 o'clock in the morning. During this time, the supermarket called the police multiple times, but the problem remained unresolved. Eventually, to put an end to the ordeal, the supermarket had no choice but to pay her 3,000 yuan. As time went on, Du's extortion skills became even more polished, and, to everyone's astonishment, she expanded her career into a family business. Her son and daughter-in-law joined in, forming a highly coordinated team. Together, they targeted restaurants, supermarkets, pharmacies, and hospitals, any place where they could make money. Exploiting people's desire to avoid trouble, they repeatedly succeeded. However, Du's path of deceit eventually met its downfall. In one incident, she entered a supermarket holding a bottle of soft drink, claiming she had bought it there and that its quality was poor. This time, however, the store owner refused to give in. Instead, he called together 200 to 300 local Zhejiang residents to confront her. Faced with overwhelming pressure, Du had no choice but to surrender. She was taken to the police station and forced to sign a written statement promising never to harass supermarkets owned by Lishui locals again. In May 2019, after a detailed police investigation, Grandma Du's long career of extortion finally came to an end. She was lawfully detained on charges of blackmail and extortion involving a large sum of money, thus ended the 3-year reign of terror of Tianjin's most notorious scammer Granny. In recent years, China's social trends have revealed a disturbing rise in staged scams and fake accident schemes. According to official data from the Ministry of Public Security, there were over 70,000 Penqi fake accident cases reported across China in 2024, a shocking 30% increase compared to the previous year. These are not just crimes for money. They expose a deeper crisis, a moral collapse where greed replaces honesty and trust between people fades away. China's social trends warns that when deception becomes normalized, society pays the ultimate price. The woman who lost her life trying to extort money is not just a tragic figure, she's a reflection of what happens when morality is abandoned. And when a Chinese-American man in the U.S. has received an 8-year prison sentence for faking an injury, it proved one thing: no matter where you are, the law never forgives deceit. So what do you think? Is China facing a moral decline? Or is it just the dark side of modernization? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more shocking investigations and real stories. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.